Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a great webinar for you all. I'm going to let Nathan and Megan introduce themselves in a second, but keep in mind we will be doing Q&A, and it will be at the end. Feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A box below, and we will get as many as we can at the end of the content. If you're having trouble viewing the screen, you can click Fit to Window in the View Options tab above. This webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive an email with the recording tomorrow. So given all that, let's kick it off. I'm going to let Meg introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan. I'm a product manager at Datadog. I work on Datadog alerting as well as our service level objective product. I'll hand it over to Nathan.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Harvey. I am a developer advocate with Google Cloud. And I'm really excited to join up with Datadog and with Megan today to talk about how you can ensure reliability with SLOs and other SRE practices. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so a quick overview of our agenda for today. We'll start off with an introduction to SLIs, SLOs, and error budgets, sort of the SRE practice around those. And then in the second half of our webinar today, I'll hand it over to Meg, who's going to show us how to set up SLOs or service level objectives in Datadog directly. So when we think about this problem space, it's always good to think about or remember how traditionally IT has worked. We have always incentivized our developers to work on agility. There's this whole Agile movement when it comes to software development. We talk to developers and we give them bonuses and raises when they're building and shipping new features. But at the same time, we typically turn to the operators in our organization and we say, you get a bonus and you get promoted when the systems are stable. And this sets up some inherent friction between these two organizations. Developers are really pushing for speed. Operators are really pushing for stability. And one of the best ways to push for stability is to accept no change. So we have to think about this because, of course, our customers want us to change. Our businesses require us to change. So how do we incentivize this reliability properly across these teams? And I want to start off with this potentially controversial statement. The most important feature of any system is reliability. I want you to just think about that for a second. Think about how do you feel about that statement? Would you agree with that statement? And maybe you would. What about the rest of the people around the system within your organization? Maybe you're an engineer whose responsibility is shipping features. Do you agree that reliability is the most important feature? Maybe you're a product owner who really wants to get new features out to the customers. Do you believe that reliability is the most important feature of that system? At the end of the day, one of the things that we know is true is that your customers come to rely on your systems. And if your customers are using your systems and they are unreliable, there is usually an opportunity for the customer to go somewhere else. And that's certainly not what we want. We want to keep the customers that we have. Given that, we also know, though, that 100% is the wrong reliability target for basically everything. In fact, this is a quote taken directly from Benjamin Traynor Sloss, who is at Google. It's taken directly from the Site Reliability Engineering book. We know that 100% reliable is the wrong target. And if you think about this, just think about the investments that you need to make in order to get to 100% reliability. You would have to make huge investments not only in the infrastructure on which your applications run, but also the architecture of those applications, the coding practices that go into building out those applications, the way that your teams work together to maintain that 100% reliability. At the end of the day, your customers probably won't notice that it's 100% reliable. Of course, we want our systems to be reliable enough that our customers are happy. So what we really need, if our goal is, or we recognize that we can't get to 100% reliability, what we really need is some principled way to talk about what is the desired reliability of a service. Principled in that everyone within our organization can agree to what desired reliability looks like. And the way that we do that when we're practicing SRE or site reliability engineering is we implement an error budget. And an error budget is a way for all of us to agree on an acceptable level of unreliability. And just like any other budget, it's a thing that can be allocated. So what we want to do in this practice is measure our objectives and try to be slightly over our target. So we set some target, we want to be just a little bit better than that target, and we want to be better than that target most of the time. But just like your real budget, your own personal finance budget, there are consequences when you overspend that budget. So we can use the error budget as a way to guide us. What happens in our organization when we do overspend or exhaust that error budget? What are the consequences? Well, SRE tells us, or SRE practices tell us, that there are many different types of consequences. Now, maybe the most dramatic consequence is if we've consumed all of our error budget, we stop all new feature releases. And that doesn't mean that we stop all engineering work. What that means is that instead of focusing on feature releases, we prioritize the engineering work that we're doing around reliability of the system. Now, as I mentioned, that is maybe the most dramatic, stop all new feature releases. There are other types of consequences that we may agree to in advance that we would take on as part of our organization. For example, we might decide that what we're going to do in this next sprint or this next round of work that we're putting into this application is we're going to prioritize postmortem items. So think about this. How many times have your systems failed? You've done a nice post-incident review or a learning review, sometimes called a postmortem. You identify some changes that you want to make to the system to make it more reliable. But those changes don't get priority because they aren't new features necessarily. And then you go into a postmortem a month later or a week later, and you find that the same items keep coming up over and over again. So if you've exhausted your error budget, this might be a good time to prioritize those postmortem items. So there are other types of consequences. Maybe you want to invest time in improving monitoring and observability, some automation, requiring SREs potentially to join your developer stand-up and start asking questions around the design and the implementation of applications. And we often get this question of what is reliable? If you think about any system that you're using, any application that you're using, what does it mean? How do you know if those things are working? A great example that we like to talk about at Google, of course, is Google Search. So if you think about Google Search, what does it mean for Google Search to be reliable? What does it mean for Google Search to be working? Well, most of the time, people that I ask that question to come back with an answer like, well, I expect when I type in a search query that I get some results back. But if you just think about that simple interaction, I went to the page, I typed in a query, I got some results back, there are lots of things that are actually happening there. So first, the page had to be available. Next, as you're typing a term into the search box, you probably have recognized that Google will do some autocomplete or some suggested words or topics that you might want to query for. So what if that's not working? Does search still work? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But we have to sit down and come up with what does it mean for a system to really be working, or how do we know if it's actually reliable? We need to sit down and answer that question as a team. And of course, when we're thinking about that question, we need to think about it not in terms of what do I need as an operator or what do I need as a developer for the system to be working. We need to think about it in terms of our customer's experience. Now, when we utilize all of our error budget and there are consequences, that's one side of the coin. But there is the other side of the coin. What happens when we have error budget that is remaining? What can we spend our error budget on? As I mentioned, we want to hit our target and be just slightly better, but we don't want to be too much better. So how can you spend that error budget? Well, that error budget can inform you, or when you haven't consumed all of your error budget, that can be a signal to you and your team that you aren't moving fast enough. Maybe you aren't learning enough or getting feedback fast enough from your customers. So you can use the error budget to release new features. You can use the error budget for some planned downtime. Maybe you have to make a bunch of upgrades across the system, whether that's hardware upgrades, software upgrades, what have you. You can also use your error budget or your planned downtime, essentially, or planned unreliability for some risky experiments. What can we learn more about how our customers are using this application? How do we know that our customers are happy? Are there changes that we're interested in releasing that we aren't sure how those changes are going to work? Use the error budget to fund that prioritization, to fund that sort of work. So let's talk about how do we actually implement an error budget. So the error budget itself is the construct or the parameter that's going to help us drive prioritization of our engineering work. So think about this. When you come in the morning, you have a pile of engineering work in front of you. You have this question: should I work on new features, or should I work on making the system more reliable? Maybe making the system more reliable includes things like paying off some technical debt. Whatever that happens to be, you can use the error budget to drive how do you prioritize that: new feature work or new reliability work. So we're going to evaluate our performance over a set window. Maybe we're going to look back over 30 days or look back over 2 weeks or something like that. And whatever budget we have left can help us drive and make that decision: work on features or work on reliability. So let's talk about how do we actually go about creating that error budget. We start with a thing that we call SLIs, or service level indicators. Now, an SLI is a quantifiable measure of service reliability. Remember, I talked about the error budget being a principled way to talk about how do you make prioritization decisions. All of this has to be based on real data. You can't make an error budget or set a service level indicator based on how someone feels. It has to be something that we can actually measure. So it is a quantifiable measure of service reliability. It's a metric. So how do you go about choosing a good SLI? Well, every SLI is a metric, but not every metric is an SLI. Think about these metrics as an example. CPU utilization, that's a metric. It tells us how utilized our CPUs are. How much free memory do I have on a particular server or cloud instance? How long has this container been running? How much disk space is available? Each of these are metrics that we can look at. We may even have been alerted on these sorts of metrics, but these metrics actually don't make very good SLIs. When we think about our SLIs, we have to think about our customers. What are the indicators that we can get from the system that inform us or tell us how do our customers feel about the reliability of this system? How do our customers feel, is this system working? And of course, what we're looking for are happy customers. We want those green smiley faces, not the sad, frowny faces that are red. When it comes to selecting an SLI or a service level indicator, it's important to remember what is the action or what is the type of system that we're looking at. So if you think about transactions, if you're running a website as an example, that's a request response mode. So the web browser requests a page and the web server returns that page to you. So in that sort of scenario or that sort of workflow, some good SLIs might be around availability. When I make a request, is that web page available to me? But availability isn't enough. We might also want to look at latency. How fast do I get results back? Or how fast does that page return to me? And maybe also the quality. So did I get the right information back? This is a great example if we go back to that search results. So am I getting quality results? And then there's also other types of interactions that your customers might have or that may be happening within your system. Maybe your system is responsible for data processing. So maybe you're, I don't know, like transcoding some videos. A video in one format comes in at the beginning of this system and another format of that video comes out on the other end. So what's the throughput look like? What's the coverage and correctness and so forth? And then similar SLI options for storage, throughput and latency. So let's just take some other details around SLIs. So when we write down SLIs, what we really want is a percentage. So we're going to look at all of our events and we're going to use those as the denominator and we'll divide them by, we'll divide the good events by the valid events. So as an example, let's say that our SLI or our service level indicator is going to be the HTTP response code when a client makes a request against our web server. So what we would do is we would count up all valid events. So all requests that come into our web server, those are all valid events. And the good events are those where the HTTP response code maybe is 200, which means okay. One that would not be a good event or a good service level indicator, a good metric, would be an HTTP response code of 500. That's a failure. So we'll take all of our requests and we'll use that to divide and figure out how many or what percentage of the requests were actually good requests. And that's what that will give us a percentage, and that becomes our SLI. So let's just look at that through sort of a worked example. So let's say that we have a profile page and we sit down together, the engineering team, the operations team, the product management team, we all sit down together and we say, okay, what does it mean for this application to be working? And we've decided that one of the things that it means is that the profile page should load successfully. Now, that's a nice statement, but we can't really measure that. We can't really have a principled argument around whether or not the profile page has loaded successfully. What does that actually mean? So how do we define success, and where is it measured or recorded? So let's further refine this. So the proportion of valid requests served successfully, that's what we'll measure. But what does it mean to be a valid request? Again, we need to refine this SLI a little bit more. So let's say it's the proportion of GET requests against a particular URL, or in this case, 2 URLs, our profile page. So can we load the profile page? And then maybe on this profile page, we have an image that is the avatar for this particular user. So let's look at the proportion of GET requests where the profile page and the avatar URL are both served successfully. But we also have to figure out what exactly does it mean to be successful. So let's refine this just a little bit further here. So when we have a 200 or a 300, maybe even some 400s, maybe what we've decided is that if somebody calls, say, the profile page for a user and that user doesn't exist, maybe we return a 404. We might say that, well, that's probably like, maybe that's a bot that's trying to scrape our website or just guessing at users. So we can exclude those, or we can say that those were good requests, whatever. But the important bit here is that we've taken the time to go from the profile page should load successfully. We've refined this SLI a number of times to get to a place where we can actually set up an objective measure around what does this availability look like. Now, we could do a similar thing for latency on the profile page. Not only should it load successfully, but also it should load fast. If it takes 20 minutes for the profile page to load, no one's going to stick around for that, and it's going to feel like it's broken. So how do we define quickly? We kind of walk through this same series of refinement questions. So how do we define quickly? When does it start and stop? So we'll look at the proportion of HTTP GET requests for that user where the entire response is sent back within X number of milliseconds. Now, the other question we have to ask is, where are we going to measure these things? So if you think about this, we are looking at HTTP response codes. Where could we potentially measure those? Well, of course, we could measure them at the web server itself. We could measure them stepping a little bit closer to our customers. We could measure them at the load balancer. The load balancer might be a better place because if a particular node behind our load balancer goes away, we expect that our load balancer catches that and takes that node out of the rotation. So we have to think about where can we measure this information. And we want to be as close as possible to the customer. But of course, as close as possible to the customer might mean that we have to implement some client-side instrumentation. That might actually be a step too far. That might require some changes to our application logic, to the way that we're building our application. And importantly, it might also require that our users or our customers agree to share that information with us. So as you're just getting started with SLIs and SLOs, I would strongly recommend that you take advantage of the data that you have in hand today. And Datadog can certainly help you with some of that, as we'll see a little bit later on. So in our example here, we've decided that what we're going to do is we're going to measure these things at the load balancer. So we're going to look at those status codes and we're going to look at those response times at the load balancer. Of course, If you think about the latency, measuring the latency at the load balancer just says how long does it take from the request to hit the load balancer for the request to go back out of the load balancer. Obviously, for our customers, there's a whole lot of time and space in between those, between the customer itself or him or herself and the load balancer. So we're missing some of that, but it's okay because we recognize that this is a proxy and that it will give us real data that we can use to make decisions. So here's what some of the service level objectives might look like directly within Datadog. And as I mentioned, we're gonna have Meg come and give us a little demo of how to get these set up and talk through exactly what those look like. But you can see here that these are SLOs, or service level objectives, that are looking at particular targets, or SLIs, and setting specific objectives for them, looking back over a time window. So these service level indicators are the first step. The next thing, once we understand the behavior of our system, or we have indicators that show us how our system is behaving, the next step is to set a service level objective, or an SLO. So a service level objective is a reliability target for an SLI. So an individual SLI maybe is that HTTP status code, but I want to measure the collection of all of my HTTP status codes, thinking about happy customers. Again, it always comes back to our customers, and we always want to be measuring this from the point of view of our customers. So what goals should we set for the reliability of this particular customer journey, loading up the profile page? And you can see here that our objectives have both a target, so for availability, we say 99.95, or sometimes 3.5 nines of availability, or 99.95 of those requests should be successful. But we also have to have a measurement window. And typically these measurement windows are rolling windows that are looking back. So 99.95% successful in the previous 28 days. So looking back over 28 days, do we have a 99.95 success rate? If we do, or better than that, that means we have headroom in our error budget. We still have room to spend that error budget. So then we need to look at what are the consequences of us not spending that error budget. That's where we might decide, oh, we need to ship features faster. We need to try this risky change. On the other hand, if what we find is we're significantly below that and we've exhausted all of our error budget, then we need to prioritize reliability work. So for our availability, maybe we say 3.5 nines successful in the previous 28 days. And then latency, maybe we say 90% of our requests are served in less than 500 milliseconds. Again, over the previous 28 days. And so within Datadog, you can set up exactly this. So you set an SLI target and a measurement window. So I have a target. My SLO here is 99%, or 99.9, or 4 nines, so 2 nines, 3 nines, 4 nines, and then looking back over various time windows. So just to recap really quickly, the 3 different S's, and in fact, we didn't even talk about one of them yet, but indicators, objectives, and agreements. So you've probably heard of SLAs before, service level agreements. I'll talk about those in just a second. But an SLI, or a service level indicator, is a metric that you use. So it's a quantitative measure of some level of service. It's important that when you think about how do you define your SLIs, you think about how do our customers experience a service level? How do our customers experience and use our service? So we have this quantitative measure, and SLI is a metric. We're going to take that metric and use it to inform our SLO. And our SLO, the service level objective, is a target that we're trying to hit. So we want to return 99.9% of calls within 200 milliseconds. 99.5% of all calls should return non-errors. And the nice thing about these service level objectives is you can actually use them to help inform when and how you alert your teams. So maybe you don't need to alert if CPU is spiking, but you do need to alert if you're consuming more of your error budget than you expect. The final S in our round of 3 is a service level agreement. So a service level agreement really is a promise that you've made to your customers. The thing about service level agreements is that they are usually an agreement that is set by the business with the other business that you're in business with. Sorry for using that word business 3 times in a row there. But if you think about a service level agreement, what are the consequences when you exhaust a service level agreement or when you miss a service level agreement? Oftentimes that consequence is you have to pay money or give credit back to your customers. And of course, I don't know much or anything about the business that you're in, but I am pretty certain that your business is not in the business of paying your customers. I'm pretty sure you want the money to flow the other way. So we never want to violate our service level agreement. So when we think about our service level objectives, we want to make sure that those service level objectives are a little bit more stringent or tighter than our service level agreement, so that we have a little bit of room to flex if we need to. So let's just recap this a little bit. So we have a company, Acme, we have customers, and we have a service level agreement with our customers. We're going to hit 99.5%. What that 99.5% is kind of up in the air or left undefined. Maybe it's availability. So we're 99.5% available. If we only hit 98.5% over a given time period, we owe the customers money. This is not a position that we want to be in. So if we have an SLA of 99.5%, we might want to set our SLO slightly tighter. So our SLO, or service level objective, is 99.8. So now, even if we hit only our service level objective, we are still well within our service level agreement, and that keeps our customers happy, and it keeps us from having to give money back to our customers. So, as I'm about to wrap up here, I have a question for you. Who cares about SLIs and SLOs? When we talk about service level agreements and service level objectives, it's easy for us to understand how technical practitioners, engineers, and operators care about SLIs and SLOs. But the truth is, because we're going to use the error budget to help prioritize our work, we really need everyone in this conversation. Our SLIs and SLOs should take our customer experience and what makes our customers happy into consideration. But we have to involve product managers and our executives in these discussions as well. How often have you built maybe some testing around an application change? You see that your tests are failing, but you have a product manager or product owner who says, no, it works on my machine, ship it out now. Regardless of the test, regardless that the test is failing, go ahead and ship this. Well, when we have this conversation around what are the consequences of an error budget, and we include product managers and executives in that, that provides some real transparency into how are we prioritizing work across the organization. So it is really important that we have everyone in that conversation. And I also just want to take a look at some of the math around this, because, you know, product owners, executives, they really want to push for that 100% reliability or 100% availability. So let's say we have an SLO that's looking back over 30 days, and we set that SLO as at 3 nines. Well, right now, here we are. We're into that period, and looking back, we have 99.97% over the last 30 days. Well, that's under our SLO, but we still have 30 minutes and 11 seconds remaining of error budget across those 30 days. So this is probably an indicator that while we have consumed some of our budget, we're probably okay in terms of being on track to meet our SLO over 30 days. However, if we adjust that by just adding 1 more 9, so we go from 3 nines to 4 nines, let's have a look at what that does to the math. We are already 8 minutes and 40 seconds over our error budget and have to inflict or take on some of those consequences. I think when you get started with these SLIs and SLOs, it's important to understand how the math works, because we're going to use that math to define how do we prioritize work, what work should we be prioritizing within our teams. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who's going to show you how to set up service level objectives within Datadog. Megan, take it away.
Great.
Thanks, Nathan. All right. So I introduced myself before, but for anybody who joined a little bit late, I'll introduce myself again. So I'm a product manager at Datadog, and I work on Datadog alerting and our service level objective product. So of course, we're here today to talk about SLOs. So I'll show you what that looks like within Datadog. So, thinking about the SLIs that Nathan was discussing, what does that look like when you're actually in Datadog? How do you know which SLI to choose? I also wanted to talk about monitor-driven SLIs as part of our product. So there are two different ways to think about it. We have event-based SLIs, which are basically a success ratio, where in this case, thinking back to the request count that Nathan was mentioning before, 99% of requests have latency less than 200 milliseconds, or 99% of requests aren't errors, they're successful. On the other hand, we have Datadog monitors or alerts. So monitor-driven SLIs are based on time. And in this case, you'd say 99% of the time latency is less than 200 milliseconds, or 99% of the time there are no errors. For the most part, you're probably looking at this and thinking that the event-based SLIs might be more fitting to what you need. This is to show you that there are two different ways that you can do that within Datadog, and you can choose which one makes sense for you, and we provide an ability to do both. So here for the monitor-based SLIs, you'd go into the service level objective page. You would select the monitor that's important to you. You would add in your target, so if we care about 99% over a 30-day window. And then we have the ability to add a title and a description and tags. So this is really interesting. If you're thinking about your SLIs in a very user-driven approach, thinking about the 2 to 3 to 5 SLIs that make sense for what you're trying to measure for your customer expectations and happiness, you can add a description here. So you can say, okay, this is why I chose that SLI. These are the teams that would need to be involved. And on the next page, you can even see like a little bit more detail into that status. So, so this is once you've actually created it. I'll back up for a second. We're still working on the creation flow, adding in the title and adding in the details. I want to show you what this is going to look like too, because when you do when you do see the SLI, you can even add a link into the dashboard or into the service map if you want to see how the services are connected. I have a GIF here, so it's going a little bit quick, but everybody will have these images when we share out the deck. So here where we're looking at the amount of time that everything is okay, here we're looking at the event-based SLIs. So now we want to see the percentage of requests. And this is also a preview into our service level objective list view. And everything is faceted search. So if you are familiar with Datadog, this might not be too new to you because we have this faceted search on various places throughout the Datadog product. But we have that here as well. So if you tag your SLIs by team, by service, or by user journey, you'll be able to sort for them here. So in this case, I'm looking for everything that's related to my web store. And then I have this detail page. So if it's a monitor-driven SLI, you will see something that looks like this because it's looking at that status bar. And if you're currently using Datadog SLOs, you'll be familiar with this view. For the event-based SLIs, we're looking at the actual request count, and that's what you'll see in the graphic at the bottom. And in this detail panel is where I see my description and where I can see my tags. So you might be wondering, how do I get access to service level objectives? So if you are a Datadog customer, you can access them in the Monitor tab, and all of our webinar attendees will be able to access this in beta. If you're new to Datadog, if you sign up for an account, you'll receive an email from us, and then we can make sure that you get beta access and you can try it out. And I'll hand it over to Alicia. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Meg. All right, so time for some Q&A. If you would like to, if you have a question, we have a Q&A box at the bottom, so feel free to put your question in there and we'll get to it.
Yep, and if you think of any questions afterward as well, we will also be moderating a SLO webinar Slack channel in the Datadog public Slack. So if you're already there, after the webinar, we'll be addressing questions in there. And if you want to share the recording that you'll receive with any other of your colleagues, they can also post questions into the SLO webinar Slack channel until September 6th. But for now, we'll be going through the Q&A in the Zoom webinar.
Awesome. So I have a question here. Which SLO should I start with?
Oh, I'd be happy to address that. That's a great question. So I think when it comes time to figuring out what are the SLIs and SLOs that you should start with, I think there are a couple of things that are really important. The first thing that's really important is to pull together that cross-functional team to ask the question, what does it mean for this application to be working? Or what does it mean that our customers are happy utilizing or using this application? And so that cross-functional team should probably include engineering, it should include operations, and it should definitely include the product owner or the product management team. Because remember, what you're going to do with these SLIs and SLOs is you're going to use them to inform the error budget, which talks to us about how do we prioritize the work that we're doing. So the first thing to do is really to figure out what does it mean for your application to be working, or what are some of the critical user journeys or the critical user paths through your application. So for example, if you are an online e-commerce vendor or site, you want to make sure that people can put things into their shopping cart, and most importantly, that they can check out, that they can pay you. If you're a healthcare site, maybe you want to make sure that a provider, like a doctor, can open up a claim against you as the insurance company or something along those lines. So you want to figure out what are those critical user journeys. The next thing that you want to figure out is, what does it mean for our customers to be happy? Maybe your customers are generally happy now, and that can help you set your SLO or your objectives, your service level objectives. They're happy with the current performance, so let's look back on the current performance and set our SLOs to meet with that current performance. Or if they're unhappy with your current performance, that can inform the SLOs or the objectives in much the same way. Now, the other thing that I will say about SLIs and SLOs, as you get started with them, it is likely that you are going to set the wrong service level indicators and the wrong service level objectives. So just like everything else, you want to take the time to sort of have a retrospective around this, to look back over time to see how things have gone, and decide when it's appropriate to adjust your SLIs and your SLOs, both adjusting what those objective targets are and adjusting how you're defining and measuring those things.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. So we have one more question. We have a few more, but we'll get to this one. From Anonymous, are there any suggestions for having discussions with teams in terms of error budgets without focusing on reliability sounding punitive to the business and instead as a means of accelerating future development?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think oftentimes what happens is we talk about error budgets and the consequences in terms of what do we do when things go wrong. But I definitely made a point in my portion of the presentation to talk about what do you do when you haven't consumed all of the error budget. So you can really talk about how the error budget is an indicator. When we haven't consumed all of our error budget, that's an indication that we aren't moving fast enough, that we aren't experimenting the way that we could. We aren't maybe getting feedback from our customers. And so we have to have, we sort of have to start that conversation with what is it that makes our customers happy? What keeps them coming back to our application? Because we don't want to give up on that. We always want them coming back. But maybe start talking about the error budget in terms of we're exceeding our customers' expectations. If we dial that back just a little bit, look at the consequences that we could have. Those consequences are positive. We can ship features faster and our customers are going to stay happy. And in fact, when we can respond to those customer demands through shipping features faster, maybe that's going to make them even happier than they are right now.
Awesome. All right, one more came in. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Jurgensen. Can we export a report according to the data generated with this monitor?
So if this is asking about generating a report for monitors in general, we do have a Datadog monitor report. For anything that's generated for SLO purposes, these will all be visible on dashboards, and you can share a dashboard via a public URL, and that would be one way to report.
Great. Another one from an anonymous attendee. In a microservice context, should each microservice have SLOs as a contract with upstream, downstream services? Or should we focus more at the high level from a point of view from the customer? So public-facing APIs for a web front end, for example.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think that, you know, as you get started with SLIs and SLOs, I find it pretty easy to get really excited about them and want to throw SLIs and SLOs everywhere. Just remember a couple of key things. First is that your service level indicators and your service level objectives really should be from your customer's point of view. So who is the consumer of the service that you're creating? Now, typically you want to focus on the customers of your business, right? In a microservices sort of environment though, sometimes I'm creating a service that my fellow employees are utilizing, right? Or other parts of the application are using. I think it's important to remember that we want to really focus on the end user, the customer that's paying our business money, or the real customer that our business is trying to serve. The other thing that's important to recognize is that if you have no SLO in place for a particular service, so maybe you are one of the teams that's responsible for one of the microservices that makes up the application, there's always an inherent service level objective, whether or not you've defined it, or an implicit service level objective that you've set. And that service level objective is really based on past performance. So if your customers or the people consuming your API or your microservice are generally happy, they'll stay happy as long as you keep giving them consistent performance. So that's an important thing to remember also, is that there are implicit SLOs. And if you introduce a change that dramatically impacts the reliability of your service, your upstream or downstream users are going to notice that.
Awesome. All right, another question from Anonymous. What about alerting and error budgets?
Cool. Okay, that's a great question. So for error budgets, we do have that available for both monitor-based and event-based SLIs. So within the service level objective beta, you can see that within the detail panel and within the list view that I was showing earlier. So you will be able to see those. As for alerting, so right now what we'll have available is if you are using a monitor-driven SLI, that will trigger your alert. So that'll let you know that the SLI is breached. And then everything else we will have later on as we release new features.
Awesome. Another anonymous. In a system made up of hundreds of microservices, most of which are not directly customer facing, at what level should SLOs be defined? Around the system as a whole? Distinct SLOs for each individual microservice?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would answer it kind of two ways. First, always start with the customer. So think about the system overall, the customer's experience with that system. What are those critical customer user journeys? And then the other piece that I would say there, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I'm trying to look at the question again here. Right, distinct SLOs for each individual microservice. Sorry, sorry for the brain fart there. Please excuse it. Remember, the error budget comes down to how do you prioritize work. So I think that when you think about those individual microservices, it really comes down to how does a team prioritize the work that they're going to do. So if you have a team for each of your individual microservices, then yes, maybe it is appropriate for each of those individual microservices to have an SLO. However, if you have a team that's responsible for a collection of microservices, that is where the error budget is going to define, should I work on new features or should I work on reliability? Or rather, should we as a team work on new features or reliability? So I would kind of set them at that team level so that you can really understand the dynamics of how your customers are consuming the application, but then also use that as the way to help prioritize that work. I hope that helps.
Awesome. And then related to error budgets, Tom has a question. In an organization which is new to application development, what's a good way to approach the allocation of error budget?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things there, Tom. So first, I think what you want to do when you think about allocating your error budget is look back on the data that you have today. So are your customers generally happy with the service? If they are, and you're getting the responses that you want, then you can help use that data to help set what are your current targets or what are your current service level objectives. But I think this is also a thing where it's really important that we have the product team and sort of, in air quotes, the business as part of this discussion. Depending on where your organization is or where your application is in its life cycle, you may have very different reliability requirements and therefore set objectives very differently. So if you think back, I'll use an example that maybe we're all familiar with. If you think back to the very early years of Twitter, Twitter was not a very reliable platform. It would fall over a lot. But that was okay. It was acceptable because what Twitter was prioritizing at that time was growing their user base. So we want more users, and the reliability is less important. As you get more and more users and more adoption of the platform, the reliability goals that you set as an organization start to change. So it is really important, especially when you're getting started, to think very critically about what are the goals of this business? What are the goals of our organization? What are we trying to do to our customers? And then set your error budgets and your SLOs and SLIs accordingly.
Awesome. And then last question we're going to answer for today is from Katabari, and I'm so sorry if I butchered your name. I have often seen SLI, SLAs for front-end web applications for latency. How do SLI, SLOs apply to batch flow processes?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I would refer you back to the slide about the SLI menu. So if you think about a batch process, that's really like a pipeline. So you put something into the front of that batch process, it traverses through that pipeline, and then it comes out on the other end. So some SLIs that you might look for there are completeness of the things that you put in the front of that batch. How many things come out the backside of that batch, and is that the appropriate number? You might also look at throughput. So how long does it take when an item enters the beginning of that pipeline until it comes out the back end of that pipeline? So I think just refer back to that slide about the SLI menu. And that is not, in a batch process, that's not request response. That's something else. And so we have different SLIs that we recommend there.
Awesome. And so we actually have time for one more. This is the very last, but another anonymous is multi-window, multi-burn rate monitoring as described in the site reliability workbook still considered best practice?
Yeah, I think that multi-window and multi-burn rate, as they are described in the site reliability workbook, are things that you can use. They might not be the thing that you want to start with, though. So I think that really the best practice for any of this, in my opinion, is that you think critically about the SLIs and SLOs that you're setting and how you're utilizing them, and then you take the time to reflect on how they're impacting how you prioritize work and how those impacts are having an impact on your customer's experience. So maybe there are a little bit more advanced concepts, the multi-window and multi-burn rate, that you might want to think about in the future, but it's certainly not where I would start.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for your questions. I'm handing it over back to Meg for just a few closing thoughts.
And I'm going to take this closing thought. So the site reliability workbook was mentioned in that last question. If you're interested in reading more about these concepts, Google, together with O'Reilly, have published a couple of books here, the Site Reliability Engineering book and the Site Reliability Workbook. So if we just describe them briefly, the Site Reliability Engineering book is really about the SRE practices within Google. It gives you an introduction or some deep insights into how Google runs production systems. But I mentioned earlier, I don't know much about your business. I'm pretty sure it's not Google. So how do you take what we're doing inside of Google with SRE and apply it to the business that you're in? Well, that's where the Site Reliability Workbook comes in. It's practical ways to implement some of the concepts and ideas within the SRE book. So I think it's certainly the case that you do not have to be Google size or Google scale in order to benefit from site reliability engineering or SRE practices. So I recommend that you check out both of these books. And in fact, not only can you buy the books, you can also read them for free online at this URL here, landing.google.com/SRE/books.
Awesome. And it's Megan again. So on September 17th, Datadog will be hosting a summit in Berlin. And we will also be continuing the conversation about service level objectives and how to use them at Datadog as well. So if you are around in Berlin during this time, please come by. And that's a link to the website to get more information about the schedule, the location, and what to expect. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us. You will get this recording tomorrow via email. Thanks, everyone.